In the forgotten corners of the realm, where mist clings to broken stones and hope dies quietly in the shadows, there lived a woman who had mastered the art of disappearing while standing in plain sight. Alara Wynn had no pack, no family name that mattered, no scent to mark her as anything more than a mistake the goddess had forgotten to claim. For 23 years she had existed in the spaces between, too weak for the strong to notice, too different for the desperate to trust, too afraid to believe she might be anything other than the nothing everyone assured her she was. She ground herbs for those who would never thank her, set bones for those who could not meet her eyes, and whispered healing words over wounds that would scar regardless of her care. This was her life: service without recognition, kindness without reciprocal, existence without purpose beyond the next breath she was allowed to take. The mark on her arm had been her secret shame since birth, a silver crescent split down the middle like a moon shattered by divine wrath. Her mother had died bringing her into this world, taking with her any explanation for the symbol that pulsed beneath Alara's skin like a heartbeat she couldn't silence. The village wise women had whispered of curses and called it a sign of the goddess's displeasure. The local alpha had declared it an abomination and banished her from packlands before she could even walk, so Alara had learned to hide it, to cover it, to pretend that the burning beneath her skin was nothing more than old scar tissue and childhood imagination. She had learned to be nobody. But on the night when steel rang against steel in her village square, when torchlight revealed the golden eyes of a king who had conquered nations, when rain washed away 23 years of careful deception, Alara would discover that some marks cannot be hidden forever, and some truths are too powerful to remain buried. The goddess had not forgotten her after all. She had been waiting. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. The scent of dying herbs filled Alara's modest cottage as she ground willow bark into powder, her movements precise despite the tremor in her hands. Outside, autumn rain drummed against weathered shutters, each drop echoing the anxiety that had settled in her chest 3 days ago, when the ravens brought news. The Alpha King's army was moving through the northern territories, hunting rebels who had dared challenge his rule. Just a few more villages, she whispered to herself, the same mantra she'd repeated since dawn. They'll pass us by. We're nobody important. Nobody important. The words tasted bitter, even as they offered comfort. Here, in the forgotten village of Millhaven, tucked between dying forests and barren fields, invisibility was survival, and Alara had perfected the art of being invisible. A sharp knock shattered her concentration, sending the mortar clattering to the wooden floor. Healer. The voice belonged to Marcus, the baker's son. My sister. She's burning with fever. Ma says to fetch you quick. Alara's wolf stirred uneasily as she opened the door. The 19-year-old stood before her, rain-soaked and desperate, but it wasn't his panic that made her stomach clench. It was the wrongness in the air, a metallic tang that spoke of violence approaching like a storm front. Bring her here, Alara said, already reaching for her healing supplies. I'll have a bed ready. But Marcus shook his head. Can't move her. She's at home and Da's afraid to... His words died as the sound of hoofbeats thundered through the village, growing closer with each heartbeat. Alara's blood turned to ice. Through the rain, she could see torches blazing in the distance, their light dancing off steel and leather. The army, they weren't passing through. They were stopping. Hide, she breathed, pushing Marcus away from her door. Tell your family to hide. Now. The young man stumbled backward, his face white with terror, before disappearing into the maze of cottages that made up their small community. Alara pressed herself against her doorframe, watching as dozens of warriors on horseback swept into the village square, like predators descending on prey. They were magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Each rider sat tall and confident, their armor bearing the silver wolf emblem of the royal pack. Steam rose from their mounts' flanks, and their eyes, goddess above, their eyes glowed amber in the torchlight, marking them as elite soldiers who could shift at will. But it was the figure at their center that stole the breath from Alara's lungs. Even from a distance, even through rain and shadow, she knew him. Every wolf in the kingdom would recognize that silhouette. Broad shoulders that carried the weight of absolute authority, dark hair that caught moonlight like spilled ink, and a presence so commanding that lesser wolves submitted before they even saw his face. Alpha King, Kaelin Drathor, the Winter Wolf, the Unbroken. Ilara's Omega instincts screamed at her to run, to cower, to make herself small enough that his attention would slide past her like water off stone. But her feet remained rooted to the ground as she watched him dismount with fluid grace, his boots striking cobblestones with the weight of destiny. "Search every house," his voice carried across the square, deep and cold as mountain granite. "The rebels passed through here. Someone gave them aid. Your Majesty," one of his lieutenants approached with careful deference. "The villagers claim ignorance. Perhaps they're telling the truth." Kaelin's laugh held no humor. "Fear makes liars of everyone, Captain Thorne. But lies have a scent all their own." Ilara watched in growing horror as soldiers began kicking down doors, their harsh voices mixing with the frightened cries of her neighbors. Old Henrik was dragged from his hovel, forced to his knees in the mud, while warriors demanded answers he didn't have. Sarah, the seamstress, clutched her children to her chest as soldiers ransacked her workshop. This was wrong. These people had done nothing but exist in the path of a conflict they never chose. And yet, they would suffer, perhaps die, because powerful men played their games with common folk as pawns. The thought sparked something deep in Ilara's chest, something that had nothing to do with Omega submission, and everything to do with the healer's oath she'd sworn to herself years ago. Protection of the innocent, defense of the helpless, even if it meant destroying herself in the process. Before rational thought could stop her, Ilara stepped into the rain. Stop. The word cut through the chaos like a blade, carrying power she didn't know she possessed. Warriors froze mid-motion. Villagers looked up from their terror, and slowly, inexorably, the Alpha King turned to face her. Ilara had imagined this moment in nightmares, meeting the eyes of the most dangerous predator in the kingdom, but imagination had failed to capture the reality of it. Kaelin Drathor didn't just look at her, he saw her, as if every secret she'd ever carried was laid bare beneath his golden gaze. "These people have done nothing wrong," she said, surprised her voice didn't shake. "If you want answers, ask me. I know every soul in this village." "Do you?" The king's tone was deceptively mild as he moved closer, each step deliberate and predatory. "And who are you to make such claims?" "I'm their healer." She lifted her chin, meeting his stare despite every instinct that screamed warnings. "I tend their wounds, deliver their children, ease their deaths. If rebels passed through Millhaven, I would know. A healer." He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could see the battle scars etched into his hands, the way rain darkened his hair to black silk. How useful. Something in his voice made her skin crawl, but she held her ground. "The rebels you seek went south 2 days ago. They took nothing but water and moved on. No one here aided them because no one here had anything worth taking. South." The king tilted his head, studying her with the intensity of a wolf examining prey. "You seem very certain for someone who claims no involvement." "I'm certain, because I was the one who treated their wounded." The admission slipped out before she could stop it, born of desperation and the need to protect her neighbors. Around them, the silence grew thick enough to choke on. Soldiers reached for their weapons. Her own people looked at her with mixtures of shock and betrayal, but Kaelin Drathor smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. It spoke of secrets and sharp edges, of a mind that had just found exactly what it was hunting. When he raised his hand, his warriors froze like statues awaiting command. "Show me," he said quietly. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Show you what?" "The arm you've been hiding since I arrived. The one you keep pressed against your side as if it might reveal state secrets." Heat flooded her cheeks even as ice filled her veins. She hadn't realized she was protecting her left arm, hadn't thought anyone would notice such a small gesture amidst the chaos. But Kaelin had noticed everything, filed away every detail, and now he watched her with the patience of a predator who knew its prey had nowhere to run. "It's just a scar," she whispered. "Then showing me shouldn't trouble you." The words were spoken gently, but they carried the weight of absolute command. This was not a request. This was the will of an Alpha King, backed by 30 armed warriors, and the power to reduce her village to ash if she refused. With trembling fingers, Ilara pushed back the sleeve of her worn dress. The mark blazed against her pale skin like a brand of silver fire, a crescent moon split down the middle by a jagged line that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Even in the rain, even beneath layers of carefully applied herb paste that had hidden it for 23 years, the mark was impossible to deny. The beta who had been questioning Henrik dropped to one knee. A warrior's sword clattered to cobblestones as her hand went limp. Gasps and whispers spread through the assembled soldiers like wildfire, carrying words that made Alara's blood freeze in her veins. The broken moon, the lost mark, the king's true mate. But it was Kaelin's reaction that shattered what remained of her composure. The Alpha King, the man who had conquered kingdoms, who had never bent knee to anyone, staggered backward as if she had struck him. His face went white as winter snow, his golden eyes wide with something that looked almost like fear. Impossible, he breathed. Alara wanted to cover the mark, wanted to disappear into the earth itself, but her body no longer obeyed her commands. She could only stand there, exposed and trembling, as rain washed away 23 years of carefully maintained deception. The Luna prophecy, Captain Thorne whispered, his voice thick with awe and terror. She bears the mark of the lost Luna. Silence! Kaelin's roar shook the very foundations of the village, but his eyes never left Alara's face. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. Clear the square. Now. Soldiers moved with supernatural speed, herding villagers into their homes and sealing doors with orders that none were to emerge until dawn. Within moments, Alara found herself alone with the Alpha King beneath a sky that wept, as if the heavens themselves mourned what had been revealed. Do you know what you are? Kaelin asked, his voice barely audible above the rain. Alara's throat felt raw. A curse. No. He moved closer, each step slow and deliberate. You're the key to everything. The missing piece of a puzzle I've been trying to solve for 30 years. I don't understand. The mark on your arm. It's not just a scar or a birthmark. It's a sign of royal bloodline, of power that was lost centuries ago, when the moon goddess herself shattered the celestial symbol to prevent its misuse. His hand reached toward her, then stopped inches from her skin. You're not just any Omega, Alara. You're the lost Luna, my destined mate. The words hit her like physical blows. Mate, Luna, destiny, all concepts that belonged to others, to wolves who mattered, who had power and purpose beyond grinding herbs and setting bones. That's impossible, she whispered. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. Nothing. Kaelin's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Nothing doesn't make armies tremble. Nothing doesn't cause ancient prophecies to unfold. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. Nothing doesn't make the most powerful alpha in the kingdom feel like a lost pup seeing sunrise for the first time. Alara's legs gave out. She would have fallen to the muddy cobblestones if Kaelin hadn't caught her, his arms wrapping around her with surprising gentleness. Through their brief contact, she felt the thundering of his heart, the tremor in hands that had never shaken in battle. This isn't real, she breathed against his chest. This is a mistake. The only mistake, he said softly, was leaving you hidden away in this forgotten place for so long. He pulled back to meet her eyes, his expression hard as iron. Pack whatever you can carry. You're coming with me. I can't leave. These people need me. My patience will survive without you. His voice brooked no argument. But you won't survive without my protection. Not once word of this spreads. Not once the other alphas learn what you are. Terror clawed at her throat. What do you mean? I mean, little Luna, that you're about to discover why some gifts are more dangerous than any curse. Kaelin straightened, every inch the commanding king once more. The mark you bear doesn't just make you my mate. It makes you the key to awakening power that has slept for centuries. Power that could unite the werewolf kingdoms, or tear them apart completely. Thunder rumbled overhead, as if the storm itself was responding to his words. Lightning illuminated his face for a brief moment, revealing something in his expression that made her blood run cold. Hunger. Not the simple desire of a mate for his chosen one, but the calculated interest of a ruler, who had just acquired the most valuable asset in existence. You have 1 hour, he said, releasing her so suddenly she had to catch herself against the cottage wall. Then we ride for the capital, and if I refuse... Kaelin's smile was winter itself. You can't refuse destiny, Alara. And you definitely can't refuse me. The journey to the capital took 4 days, that felt like 4 lifetimes. Alara rode in silence, her hands bound, not with rope, but with delicate silver chains that hummed with magic and made her skin tingle with suppressed power. Kaelin had called them precautionary measures, but she understood their true purpose. They were meant to contain whatever energy the mark on her arm might unleash. You're afraid of me, she had said on the second morning, watching him secure the chains with practiced efficiency. "I'm afraid of what you represent," he'd corrected, his fingers lingering against her wrists longer than necessary. "There's a difference." Now, as the spires of Ethermoor came into view through the forest canopy, Ilara understood why he might fear her potential. The capital was a masterpiece of stone and steel that housed nearly 200,000 souls, wolves, humans, and other supernatural beings who had sworn allegiance to the crown. From her position on horseback, she could see the palace rising like a mountain at the city's heart, its towers piercing the sky as if reaching for the moon itself. It was beautiful, it was terrifying, and it was about to become her prison. "The people will want to see you," Kaelin said, riding alongside her for the first time since they'd left Millhaven. "Word of your arrival has preceded us." "What exactly have you told them?" His expression remained carefully neutral. "That I've found my Luna, that the prophecies are finally beginning to unfold. And what haven't you told them?" This time his smile held genuine amusement. "That my destined mate spent our entire journey plotting 17 different escape attempts, none of which would have worked." Heat flooded Ilara's cheeks. She hadn't realized he was aware of her planning. The careful observation of guard rotations, the mapping of terrain, the mental calculations of how far she might run before his warriors caught her. 18, she muttered. "I beg your pardon?" 18 escape attempts. You missed the one involving the merchant caravan yesterday morning. Kaelin's laughter was rich and warm, so unexpected that several of his soldiers turned to stare. "Remind me never to underestimate your creativity, little Luna." "I'm not your Luna yet." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and the temperature around them seemed to drop several degrees. Kaelin's amusement vanished, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. "No," he agreed quietly. "You're not, but you will be." They entered the city as the sun reached its zenith, and Ilara's breath caught at the sheer scope of it. Streets paved with granite stretched in every direction, lined with shops and homes that rose 3 and 4 stories high. The air thrummed with life, children's laughter mixing with merchants' calls, the clip-clop of horse hooves on stone, and beneath it all, the subtle hum of magic that seemed to pulse through the very foundations of the city. But it was the people who truly took her breath away. They lined the streets in thousands, pressing against barriers held in place by palace guards. Men, women, and children of every age and station craned their necks for a glimpse of the woman their king had claimed. Some faces showed curiosity, others hope, and still others held expressions she recognized too well, fear and suspicion directed at something they didn't understand. "They're staring," she whispered, unconsciously pressing closer to Kaelin's horse. "They're hoping," he corrected. "The kingdom has been without a true Luna for 40 years. They want to believe that better times are coming. What if I can't give them what they're hoping for?" Kaelin's hand found hers where it rested on her saddle horn, his fingers warm and steady despite the silver chains that separated their skin. "Then we'll figure it out together." The simple promise sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. Dangerous territory for someone who needed to keep her distance from this man who claimed to be her mate. She was still processing the sensation when a voice rang out from the crowd. "Show us the mark." The call was taken up by others, spreading through the assembled masses like wildfire. "The mark! The mark! Show us the broken moon." Ilara's stomach clenched with panic, but Kaelin's grip on her hand tightened reassuringly. Without breaking stride, he raised his free hand, and silence fell over the crowd as if he had cast a spell. "My people," his voice carried easily through the sudden quiet, backed by the natural authority that made him a king. "You asked to see proof of what I have claimed. Very well." Before Ilara could protest, he was dismounting and moving to her side, his hands gentle but implacable as he helped her down from her horse. The crowd pressed closer, held back only by the line of guards who had materialized around them. "Your Majesty," she breathed. "I don't think—" "Trust me," he said softly, his golden eyes holding hers. "Please." There was something in his voice, a vulnerability that seemed at odds with his reputation, that made her nod, despite every instinct screaming warnings. With trembling fingers, she pushed back the sleeve of her traveling dress, exposing the mark that had changed everything. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by whispers that grew to excited chatter. Some people dropped to their knees. Others wept openly. An elderly woman near the front of the crowd called out in the old tongue, Words Alara didn't recognize but somehow understood in her bones. She blesses the Luna who will heal the broken moon. She prays for the mate who will restore the ancient ways. She gives thanks that the prophecy lives. The explanations came from Captain Thorne, who had appeared at Alara's shoulder like a protective shadow. His scarred face showed an expression she had never seen before, something that looked almost like wonder. "They've been waiting their entire lives to see this," he said quietly, "as did their parents, and their parents before them. You represent hope, my lady. Hope that the old wounds can finally heal." "What wounds?" Alara asked, but her question was lost in the surge of the crowd as they resumed their journey toward the palace. The royal residence loomed larger with each step, its pale stone walls rising hundreds of feet into the sky. Guards in ceremonial armor lined the approach, their faces hidden behind masks of silver and steel. As their procession passed through the main gates, Alara caught glimpses of impossible luxury, gardens that bloomed despite the season, fountains that sparkled with more than just water, and windows that seemed to capture and hold sunlight even in shadow. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's home," Kaelin said simply. "Or it will be, once you've had time to adjust." Adjust. As if adapting to life as a queen were as simple as learning a new recipe for healing salve. Alara was still grappling with the concept when their horses came to a stop before a set of doors that could have accommodated a dragon. "Welcome to Ethermore Palace," Kaelin announced, dismounting with practiced grace before turning to help her down. "Welcome home, my Luna." The title sent a shiver through her, part fear, part something else she didn't want to examine too closely. As palace servants hurried forward to take their horses, Alara found herself standing before the entrance to a life she had never imagined possible. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Kaelin said, offering his arm with courtly precision, "you meet the people who will either help you embrace your destiny or do everything in their power to destroy you." Before she could ask what he meant, the massive doors swung open to reveal a hall that belonged in fairy tales. The ceiling soared overhead, painted with murals that seemed to move in the flickering light of 1,000 candles. Tapestries depicting great battles and historic moments lined the walls, while a carpet of deep blue ran down the center of the space like a river of midnight. And waiting at the far end, arranged in a semicircle before a dais that held 2 thrones, stood the most intimidating collection of people Alara had ever seen. "The Royal Council," Kaelin murmured in her ear. "They've been eagerly awaiting your arrival." The man at the center of the group stepped forward, tall, silver-haired, with eyes like chips of winter ice. His expensive clothing and confident bearing marked him as nobility, but there was something in his expression that made Alara's skin crawl. "Your Majesty," he said, offering a bow that was precisely correct and utterly without warmth. "Lord Chancellor Victor Ashford, at your service. We are honored to finally meet the woman who claims to bear the lost mark." Claims. The word hung in the air like a challenge, and Alara felt Kaelin's posture shift subtly beside her. When he spoke, his voice carried a warning that would have made lesser men step back. "Lady Alara doesn't claim anything, Victor. She is the lost Luna, marked by the goddess herself. I suggest you remember that." "Of course, Your Majesty." Victor's smile never wavered, but his eyes remained cold as winter stone. "We only hope that proper verification can be arranged. After all, the kingdom's future hangs in the balance." "Verification?" Alara found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "What kind of verification?" "Nothing too invasive." A woman stepped forward from the group, middle-aged, elegant, with calculating eyes that reminded Alara unpleasantly of a snake sizing up prey. "Lady Helena Ravencrest, Chief Advisor on Royal Protocol. We simply need to confirm that the mark is genuine, that it carries the proper magical resonance, and that you possess the bloodline necessary to bond with our king." "And if I don't?" The question seemed to amuse several council members, but it was Victor who answered. "Then I'm afraid you'll be returned to your village with our sincere apologies for the inconvenience." Lies. The word whispered through Alara's mind with startling clarity, though she couldn't say how she knew. These people had no intention of letting her leave, regardless of what their tests revealed. She was either going to be their Luna or their prisoner, possibly both. "The verification will take place tomorrow," Kaelin said, his tone brooking no argument. "Tonight, Lady Alara will rest and recover from our journey." "Of course," Victor agreed smoothly. "We've prepared the Luna's chambers for her use. I trust she'll find them comfortable." As if summoned by his words, A woman in elegant servant's attire appeared at Alara's elbow. She was perhaps 40 years old, with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair bound in a practical bun. "My lady," she said with a curtsy, "I am Margaret, your personal attendant. If you would follow me, I'll show you to your rooms." Alara looked to Kalen, uncertain whether this was dismissal or rescue. His expression was carefully neutral, but she caught the subtle nod that seemed to say, "Go, I'll find you later." With no real choice in the matter, she followed Margaret from the throne room, leaving behind the weight of scrutinizing stares and whispered conversations. As they walked through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, the servant kept up a steady stream of cheerful chatter about palace life, mealtimes, and the wonderful view from the Luna's towers. But Alara heard very little of it. Her mind was spinning with everything she had witnessed: the people's desperate hope, the council's barely concealed hostility, and most disturbing of all, the growing certainty that she was walking into a trap that had been decades in the making. "Here we are," Margaret announced, throwing open a set of double doors. "The Luna's suite. I do hope you'll find it suitable." Suitable was an understatement. The rooms beyond were larger than her entire cottage, furnished with pieces that probably cost more than her village saw in a year. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, and windows offered a breathtaking view of the city spreading out below. It was beautiful. It was luxurious. And the windows, Alara noticed with growing unease, were barred with silver that hummed with the same magic as her chains. "Is there anything you need, my lady?" Margaret asked. "A bath, perhaps? Fresh clothing? Something to eat?" "Just time," Alara said quietly. "I need time to think." "Of course." Margaret curtsied again. "I'll be just outside if you need anything." "Dinner will be served in an hour." When the door closed behind her, Alara finally allowed herself to sink into the nearest chair. For the first time since that horrible night in Millhaven, she was truly alone. No guards watching her every move, no king studying her reactions, no crowds demanding proof of her legitimacy. Just silence, and the growing certainty that tomorrow would determine whether she lived as a queen or died as a pretender. She was still sitting there, staring at the mark that had destroyed her simple life, when she heard it. A sound so soft, it might have been imagination. A scratch at the window, like claws on glass. Alara rose slowly, her heart hammering as she approached the barred window. The glass was thick and old, distorting her view of whatever moved in the shadows outside. But as she pressed closer, she saw them clearly. Eyes, glowing amber eyes that watched her from the darkness beyond the glass. And beneath the window, scratched into the stone sill in letters too faint for any but Omega senses to detect, was a message. "Not all who serve the crown serve the king. Trust no one. The true test begins at midnight." The scratch at the window came again at 11:47. Alara had been counting the minutes since Margaret's departure. Her borrowed nightgown, silk that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, clinging to skin damp with nervous perspiration. The fire had burned low in the hearth, casting dancing shadows that made every corner of her opulent prison seem alive with hidden threats. When she approached the window this time, a figure materialized from the darkness beyond the bars. A woman, perhaps her own age, with auburn hair braided down her back and clothes that marked her as palace staff. But it was her eyes that made Alara's breath catch. They held the golden gleam of a wolf and something else. Recognition. Lady Alara. The woman's voice was barely a whisper, muffled by the glass between them. "My name is Sarah Brightwater. I serve in the palace kitchens, but my true loyalty lies elsewhere. I don't understand." "You will." Sarah glanced over her shoulder, then pressed something against the window, a small cloth bundle tied with string. "There's a servant's passage behind the tapestry showing the Battle of Silvermoon. Follow it down 3 levels, then take the tunnel marked with the crescent symbol. I'll be waiting." "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Sarah's expression grew fierce. "I know what you represent. I know what they're planning to do to you tomorrow. And I know that if we don't get you out of here tonight, the true Luna bloodline dies with you." Before Alara could ask what she meant, Sarah melted back into the darkness, leaving only the cloth bundle pressed against the glass. With trembling fingers, Alara managed to work it through a gap in the bars, her heart pounding as she unwrapped its contents. Inside lay a silver pendant in the shape of a crescent moon, not broken like the mark on her arm, but whole and gleaming with inner light. The moment her skin touched the metal, warmth flooded through her. and suddenly she could hear things she shouldn't be able to hear. Voices drifting up from somewhere far below. Confirmation from the mage. The mark is genuine, but her bloodline is corrupted. Doesn't matter. Once the ritual is complete, her power will transfer to kill her slowly. Make it look like the verification process was too much for her weak Omega constitution. Victor's plan is sound. By dawn, we'll have what we need, and the king will believe his mate died of natural causes. The pendant grew hot against her palm, and the voices faded. But Alara had heard enough to confirm her worst fears. Tomorrow's verification wasn't a test. It was an execution disguised as ceremony. Moving with desperate efficiency, she gathered the few possessions she'd brought from Millhaven. Her mother's ring, her healer's kit, and the small knife she kept for cutting herbs. The servants' passage Sarah had mentioned was exactly where she'd said it would be, hidden behind a tapestry that depicted a battle Alara had never heard of. The tunnel beyond was narrow and damp, carved from the same stone as the palace, but clearly much older. Ancient symbols were etched into the walls, some she recognized as protective wards, others completely foreign to her untrained eye. As she descended the steep steps, the pendant around her neck grew warmer, as if responding to the magic saturating the very air. 3 levels down, she found the passage marked with a crescent symbol, not broken like her birthmark, but perfect and complete, glowing faintly with silver light. The tunnel beyond stretched into darkness that seemed to swallow her footsteps, but she pressed forward, driven by the certainty that turning back meant death. The passage opened into a circular chamber that took her breath away. The walls were covered in murals that seemed to move in the flickering light of crystal formations that grew from floor and ceiling. At the center of the space stood a table carved from what looked like moonstone, its surface reflecting light that had no visible source. And waiting beside it was Sarah. But she wasn't alone. Lady Alara, an elderly man, stepped forward, his long robes marked with symbols that identified him as a court mage. But these weren't the fresh ceremonial garments of palace officials. These robes were worn and stained with substances that spoke of real magic, dangerous magic. I am Master Aldrich Stormwind, and I have been waiting 40 years to meet you. You're not part of the royal court. It wasn't a question. She could feel the difference in his magical signature, wild and untamed compared to the structured power that permeated the palace above. I was, once. His smile was sad and weary. I served your mother, before Victor and his allies had her murdered. The words hit her like physical blows. My mother? Lady Lyanna Moonwhisper, the lost Luna's only daughter. She carried the same mark you bear, the same power that threatens those who have grown comfortable with a broken kingdom. Aldrich gestured to the murals surrounding them. This chamber has been hidden for centuries, protected by magic older than the current royal line. It tells the true story of the Luna bloodline, the story Victor and his council have spent decades trying to erase. Alara approached the walls with trembling steps, her pendant growing so warm it nearly burned against her skin. As she drew closer, the murals seemed to come alive, showing scenes that filled in gaps she hadn't even known existed in her understanding of the world. She saw women who looked like her, pale-skinned, silver-haired, bearing the broken moon mark on their arms. But in these ancient depictions, the mark wasn't broken at all. It was whole, perfect, radiating power that made the very stones around them glow with celestial light. The mark was never meant to be broken, Aldrich explained, following her gaze. That's a corruption introduced by those who feared what a true Luna could accomplish. Your bloodline doesn't just produce mates for Alpha Kings. It produces rulers in their own right, wolves whose power comes directly from the moon goddess herself. Then why? Because 500 years ago, a Luna named Celestine threatened to unite all the werewolf kingdoms under her rule, ending the territorial wars that kept the noble houses rich and powerful. They couldn't kill her outright. The goddess's protection was too strong, but they found another way. The murals shifted, showing a scene that made Alara's stomach clench with horror. A woman who might have been her twin, bound with silver chains while mages worked dark magic around her. Light poured from her broken body, but instead of dispersing, it was captured in crystalline vessels held by figures whose faces were hidden in shadow. They broke her connection to the goddess piece by piece, harvesting her power for their own use while leaving behind just enough Luna blood to produce future generations. Generations that would carry the mark but never fully awaken to their potential. Aldrich's voice grew heavy with ancient grief. Your mother began to understand the truth. That's why they killed her before she could break the spell. And now they want to kill me. They want to complete the harvest. Sarah spoke for the first time since Alara had arrived. Victor has been preparing for this moment his entire life. Tomorrow's verification ceremony isn't just meant to confirm your identity. It's designed to drain your power the same way they drained Celestines centuries ago. The implications crashed over Alara like a tide of ice water. Kaelin, does he know? The king believes what he's been taught to believe, Aldrich said carefully. That the Luna bloodline exists to support and strengthen the Alpha line, not to rival it. Victor has been his advisor since childhood, shaping his understanding of tradition and prophecy, so he's part of it. No. The voice came from the tunnel entrance, deep and familiar and absolutely furious. He's not. Alara spun around to find Kaelin emerging from the shadows, his golden eyes blazing with rage that seemed directed at everyone in the chamber. His formal dinner attire was gone, replaced by dark leather that made him look less like a king and more like the predator he truly was. Your Majesty. Sarah dropped into a curtsy, but her voice held no surprise. We weren't expecting you quite so soon. Sarah has been feeding me information for 3 years, Kaelin said, his gaze never leaving Alara's face. Ever since I began to suspect that my closest advisors were planning treason. His expression softened marginally as he looked at her. I've known about the hidden chambers, about Aldrich's research, about the plot against your bloodline. What I didn't know was whether you would trust me enough to accept help. You knew? Alara's voice came out as barely a whisper. You knew they were planning to kill me, and you brought me here anyway? I brought you here because it was the only way to draw them out into the open. Kaelin stepped closer, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. For 40 years they've operated in shadows, picking off Luna descendants before they could awaken to their full power. But they needed you alive long enough to perform their ritual, which gave us a window of opportunity. Us? The king has been building a resistance for years, Aldrich explained. Loyal wolves who remember the old ways, who understand that the kingdom's strength comes from balance between Alpha and Luna power, not domination by one over the other. There are others like me? There were. Kaelin's expression grew grim. Victor's network has been methodical. Your mother was the last true Luna to reach adulthood, and even she died before she could fully break the binding spell. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a crystal vial filled with silver light. This contains what's left of her power, harvested at the moment of her death. It's been hidden here for 23 years, waiting for her daughter to claim it. Alara stared at the vial, her heart hammering against her ribs. The light within pulsed in rhythm with the mark on her arm, and she could feel its call like a song in her bones. But beneath the attraction lay bone-deep terror. What happens if I take it? You become what you were always meant to be, Aldrich said simply. A true Luna, with power to rival any Alpha King. But the process will change you permanently, and there's no guarantee you'll survive it. And if I don't? Victor completes his ritual tomorrow, drains what power you have, and the Luna bloodline dies forever. Kaelin's voice was steady, but she could see the tension in every line of his body. The choice is yours, Alara. I won't force you to become something you don't want to be. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft humming of crystals and the distant sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness. Alara looked at each face in turn, Sarah's hopeful determination, Aldrich's ancient wisdom, and Kaelin's carefully controlled desperation. If I do this, she said slowly, if I become a true Luna, what does that mean for us? For whatever this is between us? Kaelin's smile was soft and infinitely sad. It means you'll be my equal instead of my subject. It means the choice of whether to accept our bond will truly be yours, not something forced on you by prophecy or politics. He paused, vulnerability flickering across his features. It means you might decide I'm not worthy of you after all. The honesty in his voice broke something open in her chest. For the first time since that night in Millhaven, she looked at him not as a conqueror or a king, but as a man who was asking her to trust him with her life and her future. Will it hurt? Probably. Aldrich's bluntness was somehow more comforting than false reassurance would have been. The power has been compressed and confined for decades. Releasing it will be like trying to contain lightning in your bones. But you'll be here? She looked at Kaelin. All of you? Wild horses couldn't drag us away, Sarah said firmly, speaking for all of them. Alara reached for the vial with fingers that barely trembled. The moment her skin touched the crystal, the silver light within flared brilliant white, and suddenly the chamber was filled with a presence so vast and warm that tears sprang to her eyes. "Mother," she whispered. The voice that answered came from the light itself, speaking words that only she could hear. "My brave daughter, my precious girl, it's time to come home." Without hesitation, Alara lifted the vial to her lips and drank. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Power flooded through her veins like liquid starlight, rewriting her very essence at the cellular level. The broken moon mark on her arm flared silver white, the jagged crack sealing itself until the symbol blazed whole and perfect against her skin. But it wasn't just the mark that changed. Her hair lengthened and lightened until it fell like spun moonbeams past her waist. Her eyes shifted from brown to silver, reflecting light like mirrors. And from her shoulders, barely visible but undeniably real, wings of pure energy unfurled, not for flight, but as a manifestation of power that connected her directly to the celestial realm. "Goddess above," Sarah breathed, dropping to her knees. "You're beautiful." Alara could feel the truth of it, not as vanity, but as simple fact. She was Luna now, in all the ways that mattered. The cramped cottage in Millhaven seemed like a dream from someone else's life, a disguise she had worn so long she'd forgotten what lay beneath. But with the power came knowledge, terrible, wonderful knowledge, that made her understand exactly why Victor and his allies had spent centuries suppressing her bloodline. "I can see them," she said, her voice resonating with harmonics that made the crystals around them sing in response. "All of them. Every wolf in the kingdom. Their bonds and connections. Their fears and hopes. I can feel the poison that Victor has spread through the court, the way he's twisted natural hierarchies to serve his own ambitions." "Can you break it?" Kaelin asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Alara smiled, and for the first time since that night in the rain, it felt completely genuine. "I can do more than break it. I can rewrite it entirely." The palace above them shuddered as her power reached out, flowing through stone and steel like water finding the sea. In the royal quarters, Victor jerked awake as silver light began pouring through his windows. In the council chambers, documents bearing forged seals burst into flames that left only truth behind. And in the dungeons far below, prisoners who had been held on false charges felt their cell doors swing open of their own accord. "They'll know," Sarah said, her voice tight with worry. "They'll know what's happened, and come for us. Let them come." Alara turned to face the tunnel entrance, power radiating from her like heat from a forge. "I'm done hiding. I'm done being afraid. And I'm especially done letting corrupt men decide the fate of innocent people." As if summoned by her words, the sound of running footsteps echoed from the passage above. Shouts and clashing steel followed, growing closer with each heartbeat. Victor's forces were mobilizing, but they were too late to stop what had already been set in motion. "My Luna," Kaelin said, offering her his hand with a formality that somehow felt like the most intimate gesture in the world. "Shall we go reclaim your kingdom?" Alara took his hand, marveling at how perfectly their fingers fit together, how right it felt to stand beside him as an equal rather than a prize to be claimed. The mark on her arm pulsed once, sending silver light racing across her skin, and she felt the moon goddess's blessing settle around them both like a mantle. "Our kingdom," she corrected, and together they walked toward the tunnel that would lead them back to the palace. Not as conqueror and captive, but as Luna and Alpha, ready to restore the balance that had been broken for far too long. The silver light followed them up through the darkness, and by the time they emerged into the royal chambers, every wolf in the palace could feel the change that had come upon them. The lost Luna had awakened at last, and nothing would ever be the same. In the weeks that followed, historians would mark this night as the beginning of the Second Golden Age, a time when Alpha and Luna power worked in harmony to heal old wounds and forge new alliances between the werewolf kingdoms. They would speak of the trials that followed, the battles fought and won, the corrupt officials brought to justice and the innocent elevated to positions of honor. But in the quiet moments between the grand speeches and elaborate ceremonies, when Alara and Kaelin stole away to the gardens that bloomed year-round beneath the Luna's blessing, it was the simple truth that mattered most. Two souls who had found each other across time and prophecy, choosing love over fear, trust over suspicion, and hope over despair. The broken moon was whole again, and its light would guide them both for all the years to come. 5 years later, the morning sun painted the palace gardens in shades of gold and amber, as Alara knelt beside the fountain that had become her favorite place for reflection. The water sparkled with more than just sunlight. Threads of silver magic wove through the liquid, responding to her presence with gentle chimes that sounded like distant bells. "You're up early again." Kalen's voice carried warmth and amusement as he approached from the palace, 2 steaming cups in his hands. "The council won't convene for another hour. I wanted to check on the new seedlings before the day gets too busy." She accepted the offered tea, a blend of herbs she'd cultivated herself, combining her healing knowledge with the enhanced intuition that came with her Luna abilities. "The saplings from the Northern Territories are finally taking root. Lady Meredith will be pleased when she visits next month." Kalen settled beside her on the stone bench they'd had installed 3 years ago, when these early morning conversations had become routine. His presence still made her heart skip after all this time, though now it was tempered with the comfortable intimacy of a bond that had been tested and proven true. "Any word from the delegation in the Eastern Kingdoms?" she asked, noting the slight tension in his shoulders that spoke of concerns he hadn't yet shared. "They've agreed to the trade agreements, but they're still hesitant about the magical education exchange." He sipped his tea, his golden eyes thoughtful. "Apparently, some of their nobles are concerned about Luna influence spreading beyond our borders." Alara laughed softly. "They're afraid their own people might start expecting equality and representation? How terrible. Careful, my Luna. Your revolutionary tendencies are showing again." The teasing in his voice made her smile, but beneath it lay a truth they both acknowledged. The changes Alara had brought to the kingdom, the elevation of women to positions of true authority, the dissolution of the rigid caste system that had kept Omegas subjugated, the establishment of schools where all children could learn about their magical heritage, had sent ripples throughout the supernatural world. Not all of those ripples had been welcomed. "How is Marcus adjusting to his new position?" Kalen asked, changing the subject to safer ground. "Better than expected." Alara's expression brightened as she thought of the young man who had once been nothing more than a baker's son in Millhaven. He has a natural talent for administrative work, and the refugees from the border conflicts trust him in ways they don't trust traditional nobility. And his sister? Little Anna is thriving in the palace schools. Master Aldrich says she shows remarkable promise with healing magic. Alara's voice grew soft with pride. "It's wonderful, seeing children discover abilities they never knew they possessed." The fountain chimed again, and suddenly they were no longer alone. A figure materialized from the morning mist, tall, elegant, with silver hair that seemed to hold starlight, and eyes that reflected the deep wisdom of eternity. "Grandmother Moon," Alara breathed, rising quickly to offer the respectful bow that was due to a goddess. "My dear child," the moon goddess's voice carried the sound of wind through ancient trees. "You need not stand on ceremony. I come as family, not as deity." Kalen had also risen, his expression carefully controlled, but his posture relaxed. In the 5 years since Alara's awakening, he had grown accustomed to divine visitations, though he still found them somewhat overwhelming. "Is something wrong?" Alara asked, noting the subtle tension in the goddess's ethereal features. "Not wrong, precisely. But change approaches, as it always does." The moon goddess moved to the fountain's edge, her fingers trailing through water that began to glow with silver radiance. "The other kingdoms grow restless. Your success here has inspired their own people to question systems that have stood for millennia." "Change is not always a bad thing," Kalen observed carefully. "No, but it is rarely bloodless." The goddess's expression grew grave. "There are those who would see your kingdom fall, rather than adapt to the new balance you have created. They gather allies, spread whispers of Luna tyranny and alpha weakness." Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Are we in immediate danger?" "Not immediate, no. But within the year, you will face challenges that will test everything you have built here." The moon goddess turned from the fountain, her gaze encompassing both of them. "Your bond is strong, your people loyal, your cause just, but strength alone will not be sufficient for what comes next." "Then what will be?" Kalen asked, his hand finding Alara's automatically. The goddess smiled, and for a moment, her ethereal features seemed almost maternal. "Trust, in each other, in your people, in the choices you have made, and perhaps most importantly, trust in the new life that even now grows within my Luna's womb." Alara's breath caught, her free hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. She had suspected for several weeks, had felt the subtle changes in her body's rhythms, but hearing confirmation from the moon goddess herself made it real in ways that overwhelmed her. A child? Kaylin's voice was barely a whisper, wonder and terror warring in his expression. A daughter, the goddess confirmed. The first child born to a fully awakened Luna in over 500 years. She will inherit powers that surpass even your own, dear one, and enemies who will stop at nothing to prevent her birth. The implications crashed over Alara like waves against a seawall. A child, their child, a daughter who would grow up knowing her power instead of hiding from it, who would never have to wonder if she was worthy of love and respect, but also a daughter who would be born into a world where that power made her a target from the moment she drew breath. "We'll protect her," Kaylin said fiercely, his alpha instincts responding to the threat to his unborn child. "Whatever comes, we'll be ready." "I know you will." The moon goddess began to fade, becoming translucent in the strengthening sunlight. "Remember, my children, the greatest changes often begin with the smallest acts of courage. Your love changed a kingdom. Your daughter's love may well change the world." As the divine presence dissipated entirely, leaving only the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the gentle sound of enchanted water, Alara and Kaylin stood in silence, processing the magnitude of what they had learned. "A daughter," Alara said finally, her voice filled with wonder. "Our daughter." Kaylin turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite gentleness. "Are you afraid?" "Terrified," she admitted honestly, "but also hopeful. If the goddess is right, if our child truly will have the power to change the world, then maybe all the struggles we've faced, all the pain and loss and uncertainty, maybe it was all leading to this moment. The child of a true Luna and her willing alpha." Kaylin's smile was soft and genuine. "Whatever powers she inherits, she'll also inherit something more important." "What's that?" "Parents who chose love over fear, who fought for what was right instead of what was easy, who built a kingdom where she can grow up knowing she's valued for who she is, not what others expect her to be." Alara rose on her toes to kiss him, pouring all her love and hope and determination into the simple contact. Around them, the garden seemed to pulse with silver light, as if the very earth was celebrating the promise of new life and new possibilities. When they finally broke apart, the sun had fully risen, painting the palace walls in warm gold. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of a kingdom awakening. Servants beginning their daily routines, children laughing as they made their way to lessons, guards changing shifts with quiet efficiency. All of it familiar, all of it precious, all of it worth fighting to protect. "Come on," Kaylin said, taking her hand and leading her toward the palace doors. "We have a council meeting to attend, a kingdom to run, and apparently, a nursery to plan. Don't forget the other kingdoms to negotiate with and the enemies to outwit," Alara added with dry humor. Just another typical day for the Luna and Alpha of Ethermore. As they walked back toward their responsibilities, Alara felt the mark on her arm pulse with gentle warmth. Not the broken symbol of a bloodline nearly lost, but the whole moon of a legacy restored, and ready to guide the next generation. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As partners, as parents, as the living proof that love and trust could overcome even the most ancient of fears. The Luna had awakened. Her kingdom flourished, and now, with new life growing within her, the future stretched before them bright with infinite possibility. In the royal gardens, the fountain sang with silver light, and the morning breeze carried the scent of hope on every breath. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.